everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Robin, or Hoppit's Reading List, and this is the third installment, probably, of my Newbie Read Stephen King series. And today, or for the however long it takes me to read it, we are going to be reading Insomnia. So I'm doing this from memory, which is never a good start, but I have read, I want to say like 150 pages of Insomnia, which is about this guy named Ralph. He's in his 70s, and is it the year? 6 months to a year before the main story starts, his wife has passed away from brain cancer. I could be wrong. I will put the correct diagnosis somewhere. But since her passing, he has really struggled with sleep, and by the time the main story starts, he's getting, maybe 4 or 5 hours. He has a type of insomnia where he is, going to sleep, but he doesn't get a full 8 hours. In fact, the amount of sleep that he gets keeps going down and down and down until he's waking up at like 2:30 in the morning. At least where I am now, he might get even less sleep in the later part of the book. But, and this is causing him to have some hallucinations, maybe? He's seeing, like, the best word for it, I think, that I've seen described in the book is, like, auras. And I'm trying to figure out, like, what do they mean? Like, this is a really intriguing book, because there's the whole thing with Ralph's insomnia, and these auras that I really want to understand. And then there's also another part with this guy, Ed. Ed was apparently friendly with Ralph and his wife, and Ed, along with his wife, they were, very close. They were neighbors. And Ed's changed, apparently. Or Ralph just didn't, notice some things. But I'm inclined to think that Ed's personality changed. He's become a lot more aggressive, a lot more violent, a lot more just off the walls. He was talking, I can't remember what he was talking about. A doctor. He's very, preoccupied with dead babies. Not that he wants dead babies, but he's going around and he's, accused, I think, 2 people that we saw of, killing babies, and it's connected to Susan Day, and it's just, I'm like, I'm intrigued. I really want to know what the hell is going on. So it's one of these things of, I don't know enough, right? I read 150 pages. That's actually not much. The book that I have is almost 800 pages long. So me reading 150, it's like, that's nothing. So in this part of my summary, I may have information wrong. I may not remember things correctly because I've been reading this book for a week and a half. But this is what I got. I'm sure later I'll come back and be like, so I learned some things. This video will have spoilers, by the way. Not super detailed, but they will have spoilers because I'm gonna get to a point in the book where it's gonna have to be spoilers. So if you don't want spoilers, probably don't watch this till after you read Insomnia. But that's where I'm at. It's very interesting. I want to read more. I just have one more assignment for school to finish, and then I can start actually reading a bunch. So that'll be nice. My cat wants attention. Hey. Let me see. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. That's really all I got. So I'm gonna go maybe see if I can read. And I will come back with another update. I am roughly halfway through Insomnia, which honestly, I'm impressed. I'm this far in. I'm also confused. I don't know what's happening. I'm really confused. Like, I know I'm gonna get answers soon. I hope. So, because this is gonna have spoilers. Like, I'm not even gonna try. Okay. So where I am right now, Ralph has discovered that Lois can also see auras. They've fought off Doctor Number 3. I'm talking like everyone who's watching this video knows what I'm talking about. Let me back up. So, Ralph has insomnia. He's been seeing auras, and one night he was, not sleeping. And he looked out his window and he saw these two little bald doctors come out of a neighbor's house. And instinctively he knew that his neighbor was dead. And he called the police. It was confirmed she died, but it looks as though it was natural causes, which he's confused by. Because one of the doctors was holding, like, a very, like, intense, like, pair of scissors, I believe. And then the next day, or maybe a couple days later, I'm confused about time in this book, but he sees another doctor who looks different from the other two and is fucking crazy. And the doctor is trying to, like, get this stray dog, Rosalie? I don't know. To come to him, and Ralph, saves Rosalie in that instance by doing, like, a hand chopping motion. I'm so confused by, like, the magic system in here. I'm like, this is a good story. I am enjoying it, but a lot of what's keeping me reading is just wanting to understand. I'm like, I want to understand so badly. Anyway, so then he does something, and then he goes and finds Lois. She's crying in a park because her son and daughter-in-law just tried to, like, take her to an assisted living place because her doctor, Dr. Litchfield, who is the same doctor that is responsible for Ralph's wife's death, because he misdiagnosed her, Dr. Litchfield broke HIPAA and, like, called Lois's son and told him everything that she had told him. And I read that and I was like, that is quite honestly one of the scariest things in this book. I was just like, that's horrible. And luckily, like, Ralph was immediately like, they're not supposed to do that. I was like, you're right, they're not supposed to. That's horrible. And so she got in a fight with her son and daughter-in-law. And throughout the conversation, Ralph is picking up on some things, and he's kind of like, can you see the auras too? And yes, she can. So they're in this park, and who comes by but Doctor Number 3 is going after Rosalie again. And this time he succeeds. She doesn't die, but it's impending, because not only can Ralph and Lois see, like, the auras of people and, like, understand things about them, but everyone has this, they call it, like, a balloon string coming from their head, which, hi buddy, hi, cat wanted to say hi, which represents their soul, life, both, but Rosalie's gets cut, and so Ralph and Lois instinctively know she's not going to last long. And then they go back to Lois's house, share information of, like, what they've discovered. Ralph seems to just understand more about what's going on, which is on one hand good, because he's explaining things to us by explaining things to Lois, but it's also like, okay, but Lois has been apparently dealing with this just as long as Ralph, although not as strongly as Ralph has, apparently. But anyway, Ralph sort of realizes something about the first two doctors that he saw. He's like, we need to talk to them, because I think they're different from Doctor Number 3. And they see Rosalie get hit by a car, which was very upsetting. Even though you know she's going to die, I'm just like, why? Stop with the animal death. After that, you know, they're understandably upset, but they go to hospice? No, the hospital. They go to the ICU unit because Ralph believes that the first two doctors, at least, are essentially similar to like the fates from Greek mythology, where like one like spins the yarn, another one cuts the string at time of death. I forget what the third one does, but he's kind of right. By the time they they go and actually start having a conversation with these doctors, the doctors are like, yeah, ish. So that's where I'm at, and there's more that happened. I've left stuff out, but it's so much information. I'm very, very curious and very intrigued, and of course that's making me want to keep reading, which is great. I had a thought of like, I was telling Chris, my husband, about the story this morning, and besides HIPAA's breaking, or doctors breaking HIPAA, besides that, the scariest thing in the book is not necessarily like the crazy doctor or the ability to see auras. It's more of just like the town. Because I haven't read it, but I knew a lot about it. And there's just mentions in it about how, like, Derry, at the time of it taking place, Derry, the town, is just this place where just hatred is coming out and winning, and it's showing up in all these horrible ways, and that is Derry. And we're still seeing that in Insomnia, even though it's set 10 years later. And so it's just really interesting because that's the scariest thing of, like, the human element, which I think makes sense, right? And I think Stephen King does a really good job of showing that, like, no matter what supernatural, paranormal stuff is going on, the scariest things, when you think about it, is always going to be the humans. And he's right. It's just, like, there's a whole other, like, subplot thing about, like, abortion rights and this abortion rights activist coming to Derry and how that's, like, dividing the town, and the protests and the counter protests have, gotten violent so many times, and all this sort of stuff. And there's been spousal abuse, and it's just like, you read these things and it's like, holy crap, like, that's so much happening in this town. And do you have thoughts you want to share? And Ralph says at some point that, like, I think the population of Derry is like 80,000. And I'm like, that's actually not that much, and that makes it kind of scarier because, like, you would expect this, like, pattern of violence and attacks and protests and stuff like that, like, in a big city, but, like, it feels like it's happening all the time in this relatively small town. And so it's so fascinating that I'm like, that's the part that my brain gets stuck on, of, like, the humans are scary. Which tracks. But yeah, it's really interesting. I'm vibing, I'm reading, trying to just take things as they come. I've given up trying to figure out, like, to predict what's happening. But that's okay. I'm still enjoying it, quite honestly. I'm enjoying it way more than I thought I would. So, yeah, that's what's up. So I don't know how much I'll read today because we're going to a friend's house for, like, a cookout. I am hoping I'll be able to read more tomorrow because I have a very light day at work. So I probably won't finish Insomnia this weekend because I'm only halfway through. But I'm making good progress, I think, for how big of a book it is. So, yay! Okay, I finished Insomnia. I wasn't necessarily intending to finish it over the weekend. I thought it was going to take me like a little bit more time so I'd have more clips, more, you know, like sort of like in the moment reactions. I ended up just powering through it. No, powering through it makes it sound like it was difficult to get through. It wasn't. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it so much that I didn't film. Because I just wanted to keep reading. I wanted to know what happens. I wanted to understand what was going on. So yeah, I accidentally finished it. But what I'm going to do is, I did take some notes. I primarily read on my phone just because Insomnia, the copy that I have, is like almost 800 pages. So sometimes it was just kind of difficult to hold. So I'm gonna go through the notes that I made on my phone, and then I might grab the physical copy just to like see if there's anything that I missed. So hopefully this will be like a little bit more in-depth than my other clips, just because I had intended for there to be more information. Some of my notes were just highlighting things that are mentioned that are in Maine, because as I mentioned in my first video for the series, part of the reason I wanted to do this reading Stephen King is just because I am going to Maine in June to Bangor, which is where Stephen King lived for a really long time, and it's the place that is similar to Derry, which Derry is the town that Insomnia is set in, as well as It is also set there. Its events takes place about a decade before Insomnia, because I was like trying to figure out, I'm like, okay, is there gonna be mentions of like Pennywise or whatever, because I have a clown phobia and that's a whole thing. So anyway, so I highlighted that there was a mention of Sand Beach and Bar Harbor, which I don't think I'm going to in Maine, but I am going to Bar Harbor, so I might see it. I really liked the character of John, was it Leidecker? Yeah, Leidecker. I thought he was just a good guy, right? Like, he had his morals, and those were his, you know? He didn't try to push that on anyone else. He didn't let anyone else's morals really impact him. And he was a great ally. I wish he'd been more present in like the second half of the book. He was more there when Ralph was like trying to figure out like his insomnia and the whole thing with Ed. And once it was sort of revealed like what the insomnia really was, John was just sort of in the background. You know, we saw him in a couple scenes, and that was kind of it. He didn't really interact with Ralph after that. They didn't have any other, well, no, I think they did have some conversations, but like it just wasn't nearly as much. So that kind of bummed me out, but I get it. So I really enjoyed seeing him there. There is a scene where Ralph is sort of reflecting on, you know, his wife's death and like outlining what his first full day as a widower was like. And that like almost broke me. Like, it was just like, I don't know, it was so devastating. Like, I have experienced a significant loss, and the sort of just like numbness of it, and then being overtaken by just this overwhelming like crash of grief. Like, Stephen King did an awesome job portraying that to where like it had me tearing up. And I highlighted this whole section where, let me see. The weather report came next, but before the disc jockey could finish telling about how the weather was going to be on Ralph Roberts' first full day as a widower, all that stuff about clearing and colder and wind shifting around to the northeast, Ralph finally got it through his head. The watch had stopped ticking, the train had come, the boxing match was over. All the metaphors had fallen down, leaving only the woman in the room silent at last. Ralph began to cry. And I was like, damn, all right. I was like, I knew this story might impact my grief a bit. It wasn't as much as I had anticipated, but like there were definitely moments where I'm like, oh, okay, right. This does deal with grief a bit. It's not like necessarily the point, but it's there. So yeah, that was a little, it was very well done. Oh, I also did highlight some Easter eggs that I noticed. Like I've said, like, I have a clown phobia. I haven't read it. I don't really have any plans on reading it, but I know enough about it to have recognized some goose eggs, some Easter eggs. Goose eggs. Probably not as much as people who have read it, right? Like, that just makes sense. But there was a mention of, I'm pretty sure I'm right, Ben Hanscom, I think, is one of the kids from It. And he had he had designed the new Derry Civic Center, which replaced the one that was destroyed in the flood of '85. I'm not positive. I think the flood was mentioned in It, because I believe the, like, the adult portion of It is set in '85 or '86. I don't know. I could be wrong. But I was like, oh, I recognize that name. There is also a mention of how there was a mean streak in Derry, and when its residents got wrought up, they had been known to do some exceedingly ugly things. And I highlighted that because I think I may have mentioned it in my last clip of, like, the scariest thing in this book, and I think in a lot of Stephen King books, at least from what, you know, I have read and what I know of them, the scariest things are the humans and just what they do. You know, like, yeah, there's supernatural and, like, paranormal and just crazy things happening, but the scariest thing is always going to be the human. And I know enough about, I keep relating it to It just because the booktuber that I like, Gavin Reads All, just did a very in-depth video about It, and It is also, my dad has read it many times. So I know a decent amount, and so I know there's a lot of mentions in It about how, like It is Derry. And I think this just continues that line, right? Like Derry is the monster, is, you know, the scary thing under the bed. That's Derry. And so I appreciated the mention of, like, you know, Derry had a mean streak. I was like, okay, yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Because just looking at these two books of It and Insomnia, like, Derry is a very, like, eventful place, which is why I had to sort of try to remember when the events of It happened. Because I'm like, these aren't happening at the same time, right? Because that would be crazy. They're not. They're a decade-ish apart. But it was still a very interesting thing to keep in mind. This Insomnia does have, like, a plot point about abortion rights. Like, that's what the conflict is sort of, that's what the plot is sort of wrapped up in. It is this conflict between, like, pro-life and pro-choice, and this abortion rights activist Susan Day coming to give a speech, and how it's very, like, incendiary for the town. It's very divisive. And there's a scene where Ralph and Lois go to this, like, woman's home because their powers compelled them to, and it's getting attacked by pro-life people, which and the reason I bring that up is because Ralph has that moment of, like, wait, this doesn't make sense, because in the attack, 2 women were shot, like, point blank in the head. One of them was, like, 7 months pregnant, and Ralph has a thought of, one of them was pregnant, so who's the baby killer? One of them was pregnant, so who's the baby killers? Over and over and over again, of, like, the injustice of, like, well, you're saying that you want, you know, that abortion is murdering babies and, you know, wanting these babies to live. You literally killed a baby by killing its mother. And so, like, just that hypocrisy there. There was a mention of the Paul Bunyan statue in Derry, but I know that it's in Bangor, because we're gonna go see it in Maine. So I was like, because it's also mentioned in It. See, at this point, I'm like, do I really need to read It? I know a lot about it. Stephen King, I'm discovering, because, like I said, I've read, what, 6, 7 books now by him. He does a really good job of describing emotions. Like, And that shouldn't be surprising. But I wanted to read this paragraph because it really stuck with me. And I think it's a mention of like that numbness, right? Of, you know, of loss, but also just of stress. It says, Ralph found himself remembering times in his life when he'd hit the emotional equivalent of a cold spot while swimming, or clear air turbulence while flying. You'd be cruising along through your day, sometimes feeling great, sometimes just feeling okay, but getting along and getting it done. And then, for no apparent reason at all, you go down in flames and crash. A sense of, what the hell's the use, would slide over you, unconnected to any real event in your life at the moment, but incredibly powerful all the same. And you felt like simply creeping back to bed and pulling the covers up over your head. I think the reason it stuck out to me is because I had that exact moment, like, last week. Like, where it was just like, and it was out of nowhere, and there was no reason that I could identify. But it felt exactly like that. I was just like, I don't want to do anything at all. And I just felt bleh. So I was just like, that was so well done. Oh, I will say, okay, so towards the end, something that stuck out at me because of the terrifying mental image was the idea of like the queenfish, which was related to like a catfish that Ralph had caught when he was younger. That was a large catfish. He discovered it was a female. It had eggs that hadn't lain yet, and like it had like not bit him or something, like tried to swallow his hand. But so that was scary. But then when Ralph sees and meets the Crimson King, the Crimson King presents as his mother at first and then fades into the queenfish. And I was like, just picturing like a giant catfish, just, I don't know, something about it was really disturbing. I'm just like, I don't like that. I don't like that. And I also don't want to be scared of catfish now because I eat them. I guess it's not scary if I eat them. But it was just like, it was a really weird mental image that I didn't, like, I appreciate it because it weirded me out, which I think it's supposed to. You're supposed to feel like tension in this scene, but like I didn't like it. And then there was also a bit with this like kid that, you know, it turns out Ralph and Lois get these powers to protect this kid so that he can, you know, live out his destiny. And his destiny is a part of the Dark Tower series. And so there's a mention of, like, there's actual mention of the gunslinger. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. I have tried to read the gunslinger. I think I mentioned this in my first video. But I just had trouble with it. But I think I was also, like, maybe 20. I don't know if I would feel differently now. But, so those were my notes. I'm sure there's other notes in my copy, but you know, I think it's suffice to say I did really enjoy Insomnia. I'm looking forward to continuing to read Stephen King. If anyone has any recommendations of books that they think that I would like based off of, you know, my feelings about On Writing, The Body, Insomnia now, like, please let me know. But otherwise, I hope you, I don't know, enjoyed this newbie reading Insomnia. Feel free to leave a comment, like the video, subscribe, and click the notification bell, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!